Hello everyone, I hope you're doing brilliantly. So today we are going to be looking at question 2 on language paper 1 for AQA. I will do other videos on other exam boards as well, but since AQA seems to be the most popular one, I'm going to do that one first. So for question 2, I'm sure you already know that the template for it essentially will always be how does the writer use language to describe, or it might be represent as well. So here's some examples just from previous years because it can be really random to be honest. So in 2023 we had one about a hyena's appearance, and that seems to be a lot of what the teachers are using as mock exams this year. We also have an old man, and we also have a conflict with a scorpion, and then on the fourth one in 2021 we have an impression of a city. So as you can see, there's like a full range of things. They really do like to have a bit of a variety. So you really could be asked to analyse anything. And another thing to remember is the fact that they will only make you read between a certain number of lines. So they might say from line 9 to line 15, for example, and then you'll have to look at that passage specifically, and you will have to identify language techniques in that passage and analyse them. If you take anything from outside of that passage, you are going to get no marks, essentially. So make sure you double check the question, read the question properly, and go according to the line numbers. So what can you actually use? Well, I'm actually going to start with what it says at the bottom. I'm going to say do not include sentence structures, tones, focus shift, pacing, anything like that, because the reason for this is because it's structure. So structure is question 3. It will say, how does the writer use structure to interest you as a reader? And that's the sort of thing you can pick up, but do not use this for question 2 because question 2 is language. So for your language question, you can essentially use any of these things, and this is not a complete list. If you want me to do a video on that kind of thing, I absolutely will. But word classes and types, metaphors, personification, similes, alliteration, imagery is definitely a good one, and rhetoric as well. So all of this stuff essentially just becomes the backbone of question 2. So all of this stuff is stuff that you definitely want to know, and this is really the stuff that you should know as well. So if you do want to go a little bit further in advance in your grade, you should probably know a little bit more than this, but this is really good foundations. This would get you probably up to a grade 6. So yeah. So I think something that is quite commonly glossed over is the fact that sometimes language devices can have a very common effect. Like, for example, repetition is often used for emphasis, and it's barely ever used for anything else. So this includes other forms such as anaphora and polysyndeton. If you want me to go through those in a different video, I absolutely will. That is fine. And things like listing too, of course, used for emphasis on how much of something there is. Sometimes they're all different things, which makes it slightly different. But if it's listing, usually it is for emphasis. Somewhat the same with alliteration. So alliteration is mostly used to draw your attention to a certain area. Alternatively, it can be mimicking something. So if you had plosive sounds, for example, plosive alliteration is just B, P, D. It might mimic something violent like bullets or aggression or something like that. You might also have heard in things like Wilfred Owen, we have flowing flakes that flock. So of course that's fricative alliteration because there's repeated Fs, and they're quite high level things to identify as well. So don't worry if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, fricative alliteration. So it might be mimicking the sound of snow on snow. You know, when snow hits the ground. It's very quiet, but it does have a kind of sound, and maybe even stepping in snow as well. So those flakes are being mimicked in their sounds. But yes, if you are aiming for higher grades, you're going to want to think a little bit less obvious. And I will definitely do a whole video on that. But we'll go through this in this example here. So Here we have an extract from Jane Eyre. Very good book, by the way, definitely recommend. And this is about a room called the Red Room. So Jane, the narrator, gets shut in a red room, and she's very frightened of it because, you know, she has kind of an imaginative, childlike mind, and we can kind of see how frightened of it she is here. And this is definitely the kind of length you're going to get for your extract. So you can pause the video and read this yourself if you would like to. I'm not going to sit here and read it to you because that would take forever. But there are some really interesting things in here, and I do think if you pause it as well, you might have an opportunity to kind of pick out what you want to pick out from it. But I'm definitely going to show you some examples of my own. So here's the things that I found interesting, the highlighted things. We have the Red Room, of course. We have seldom slept in. We have one of the largest and stateliest chambers in the mansion, etc. So there's quite a lot of references to red I've picked up. There's quite a lot of references to colour in general. And we've also got the idea that everything is kind of large and stately. And we'll go into that in a second. So firstly, we have something about the Red Room. So this is obviously alliteration because it starts with the same letter. And it does immediately draw us to the fact that the room is primarily red. And you can also think about the symbolism of red and what kind of connotations it has. They are all very relevant. But we've also got seldom slept in, and this sibilance kind of gives a sinister feel to everything. And it also suggests that there is something creepy about the place. You know, if someone's kind of just going all the time, it sounds very creepy. It almost sounds like hissing. We've also got one of the largest and stateliest chambers in the mansion. So this is one of the higher level terms. So we've got superlatives, which is essentially when something is just the most intense form of something. We've got the adjective largest, we've got the adjective stateliest. So it's not just saying it's large and it's stately, it's saying it is the largest or one of the largest, which really does say a lot about it. So it really does give the impression of luxury and beauty. And of course, stateliest specifically makes it seem like this is a place for the upper classes. Not only this, we have massive pillars of mahogany. So mahogany, of course, is that type of wood. And massive gives the same impression as largest. So we can see that there is a semantic field of size because all of the adjectives are meaning large. It's kind of got a roominess to it. There's definitely something luxurious about it. We also have here about the red connotations of blood, the gothic and intense emotion, just like we have here in the Red Room. We are drawn to the fact that the room is red. We also have about the blinds being drawn down. So windows have connotations of transparency and truth. You know, eyes are the windows to the soul and all that kind of thing. And obviously, of course, they have connotations of light as well. And light represents truth. So having the blinds drawn down definitely suggests concealment and unhappiness. Furthermore, we have shrouded. So shrouded is kind of associated with death because, you know, shrouding is covering up a body for a burial. And it also connotes concealment. Both of those things are very relevant, and I think I would, if I were to write about this extract, I would definitely be throwing that in because I think that is a very interesting use of the verb. We also have festoons and fools. So a festoon is essentially just like a decorative garland. And this, of course, is fricative alliteration, and it draws our attention to how decorative the room is. And why is it decorative if there's nobody living in it? Bit weird, right? So the next thing we have is crimson cloth, and though red is actually a warm colour, so things like red and orange, they're all warm colours, the room is actually described as cold. And when we go through the full extracts, because I'm going to do one on question 3 as well, you'll find that the room is described as cold, and it's not in this extract, but it is in the entire extract. The alliteration with the C sound definitely mimics the coldness of the room. So you've probably learnt this in literature as well, but the C sound kind of mimics coldness generally. We've also got blush of pink, so we're starting to get a little bit bored of colours now, I'm sure, but there is definitely a kind of emphasis on colour. There's quite a few shades of red. We can say that there is a semantic field of colour. We can say there might even be a semantic field of red, because we've had things like pink, which is technically a shade of red. We've had things like crimson. We've had red on its own as well. All that kind of thing. They all add up. We've also got glared white, and then it's also repeated with also white. And perhaps this is a representation of the narrator's innocence. So obviously white connotes innocence and purity. But interestingly, something that not a lot of people realise as well is that red and white together also symbolises tragedy. So maybe it's looking forward to something that might be tragic. And then lastly, we have about the pale throne. So it's a simile because it uses the word like a pale throne. And it plays into the idea that, again, the room has a royal-like or upper-class atmosphere to it. Because obviously throne has connotations of royalty and that kind of thing. It's almost like putting someone specifically on a pedestal, maybe the guy who died, we don't know. But there is definitely a kind of royal vibe to it. So something that a lot of students forget to do is consider why it matters. Of course, a lot of people can identify language techniques and things like that, but it doesn't really matter too much if you can't explain why it's used. You definitely have to talk about the meaning and the effect on the reader, sort of the effects that the writer wanted to create. So you need to be able to analyse why these techniques are used. And a good way to do this is to make sure that you've included the word reader in your answer. So there's a couple of examples here. We've got something about the reader sort of having empathy because they're sort of enveloped in the situation. We also have something about the building tension, and it helps the reader to anticipate what's to come. But obviously this is not a complete list. You can do whatever you want as long as it's something that you can back up with your quotes. So here is a part of the mark scheme, and I think this in itself is quite interesting because it does show just what the exam board is looking for. So level 1, there's 8 marks available for this question, and level 1 is 1 to 2. So you would be offering simple comments on the effects of language. So really just this shows, and that's pretty much it. But when we go up a little bit, it says attempts to comment on the effects of language. So it's less so simplicity, and it's more a suggestion. So it's gone from, as you can see, shows to suggests. So you're a bit more reading between the lines. On level 3, we have explains clearly the effects of writers' choices of language. So we're still on suggest, but we are also talking about why it matters, and it's clear. So we are clearly writing, we are showing that we are able to write about why. So lastly, we're going on to level 4, and as you can see in the level box, it says perceptive and or detailed analysis, which means it's still clear and relevant. Of course it's still clear and relevant, but it's perceptive as well, and it's detailed. So it's a suggestion of what's going on, and we're also seeing representations, we're seeing symbolisms, all that kind of thing. So not only does it say, you know, this is the effect that's going on, but it analyses the effect. It says why the writer wants that effect. So if I were to write about this extract that I've just shown you, I would sort it into 2 different topics. And 2 of the topics that we saw most often were the frighteningness of it and the luxuriousness of it. So I'm going to talk about the Red Room, the fact that it's not slept in very often, and the Shrouded, which obviously I picked up. And I'm also going to talk about how it's meant to be really large, it's a bit royal-like, and it's like a pale throne. And the way I'm going to do this is through easy peasy paragraphs, and I completely understand if you're a bit like, what? Well, easy peasy paragraphs is something that I've kind of made to extend on from something that a lot of teachers will teach you in school. Because a lot of teachers will teach you point, evidence, explain, but they won't then extend into what gets you the really, really high marks. And this is zoom in, so looking deeper into one word in the quote, or it can be picking another quote to back up the point you've already made. And then the implication, so what does that word or phrase suggest and why does it matter? So essentially, all we're doing is repeating evidence explain again, but it's a little bit further in depth. So this is just a little bit of an example of how you can do this. So I've decided to start with my first paragraph. The room is a bit frightening. And I'm saying in the passage, the writer uses a variety of language techniques to portray the Red Room as chilling, because, you know, they do. And that is our response, or our point, or whatever you want to call it. It's basically a topic sentence. So you're basically setting up what you're going to write about straight away. And then we say, firstly, there is no doubt that the mere name of the Red Room is establishing the chilling nature of the setting, since red has connotations of blood and intense negative emotions. So firstly, in this sentence, of course, we've got our analysis, but we've also got the idea of, you know, there is no doubt, which shows it's perceptive, essentially, because it's showing that you can have a critical view of the source. Then we have, furthermore, the idea that the room is seldom slept in highlights how the room has been neglected, with the sibilants creating a sinister tone. So what we have here is, again, analysis. So all we're doing is explaining at this point. Then we want to go into these quotes, draw attention to the fact, this is explaining still, that the narrator feels unsafe through the use of repeated alliteration, which would consume the reader in the scene as though they are alongside them, meaning the narrator, subsequently causing a feeling of unease. So what we've done is explained it and said this is the effect it would have on the reader. And then we go into our zoom in and we say, additionally, the verb shrouded has connotations of death and corpses, and then our implication, which gives the impression that there is something more to this room than a reader is initially presented with. So again, effect on the reader. So that's really a good example of how to use an easy peasy paragraph or just a peasy paragraph. There are other examples if you find them easier, but I feel like this is the one that seems to work best for a lot of people. Please let me know if you found this video useful and if you think I should make more. And if you have any other ideas about what we can include in question 2, then don't hesitate to tell me down in the comments, because English has no right answer. Every analysis is awesome. See you next time.